boon to MSMEs 10x growth transformation. Mr. Anil is the founder and CEO of SAMUNNATI Financial Intermediation and Service Private Limited. SAMUNNATI was established in November 2014 and offers financial, co-financial and non-financial solutions to marginal, small and medium holders, including farmers, agri-enterprises and wholesale and retailers. SAMUNNATI stands for collective growth, collective prosperity and collective elevation, and in its journey of the last 5 years, focusing exclusively in agri and allied activities, has its presence in more than 54 value chains spread over 16 states. SAMUNNATI works with over 500 farmer producer organizations that are collectively serving about 4 million predominantly smallholder farmers across India. Anil is a career banker with over 28 years of experience in the areas of rural, retail and agri-banking. He started his career with Canara Bank and then joined ICICI Bank. Over the last decade, Anil's work was focused on creating newer institutions across the country and operating in the financial excluded markets with corresponding support structures for their capacity building. Prior to SAMUNNATI, Anil was the co-founder and trustee of IFMR Trust and the CEO of IFMR Rural Channels. Mr. Anil holds a Master's in Management from the Asian Institute of Management, Manila. He also holds a Master of Business Administration from Symbiosis Institute of Management, Pune, and a graduate degree in Humanities from Osmania University, Hyderabad. With a big round of applause, I now invite Mr. Anil Kumar SG, founder and MD and CEO, SAMUNNATI Financial Services Chennai, to speak on FinTech is a boon to MSMEs 10x growth transformation. Over to you, sir.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Wonderful to be here and come here on the dais after a very engaging and enthralling talk by Mr. Kumar Vembu. Many takeaways thanks to your foundation that you have laid for my sharing of experience. I already have a technology challenge to counter. First, I have to keep looking at the small screen and adapt myself digitally to be able to navigate the slides without the slide being in my control. It's wonderful to be here, Andhra Chamber of Commerce, and what is more heartening for me is the presence of a farmer and his 2 bullocks in the logo of Andhra Chamber of Commerce. So that's quite fulfilling, because while commerce is growing, while technology is growing, while digital footprint is doing great job in terms of non-linear scale, we still have the farmer at the center. That's great. Right? Because all said and done, as they say, pandemic or no pandemic, growth or no growth, you need to have food at the table. And the only person who toils to get this food on the table is the gentleman in the logo. Right? And then let me indulge for a minute more. I was in Singapore last week discussing about some financial investment and things like that. What I picked up from the conversations is smaller countries are looking at their food security more closely post-pandemic than what they were looking at earlier. And this nation has a tremendous opportunity and a role to play in providing the food security for the planet, for the globe, not just for India. And this is not long ago. 1968 is when our food revolution, the green revolution, started, and prior to that we were actually importing food, what was called the ship to plate, or ship to mouth. Unless you get your imports, you would not be able to feed your population, and the countries which were exporting those did have their own bullying, so to say. Anyhow, what I am going to share is my journey as an entrepreneur with an aspiration that perhaps there are one or two key things that the fellow entrepreneurs may want to find it interesting to look at, to consider. And also my understanding of how a 10x growth is possible using technology, fintech being one expression of what technology is. How can we grow non-linearly? How can we grow faster? Because the world is not linear anymore. Everything is non-linear. The scale at which businesses are coming in, the scale at which the businesses are disappearing. Mr. Vembu, I was reminded of a wonderful local entity called Fast Track that was there prior to Ola Uber. 2473-2020. I still remember that number because I am one of the most satisfied customers of Fast Track. Not a big fan of Ola or Uber anymore. I don't even have those apps on my mobile anymore. My office takes care of that. But Fast Track was the most efficient. They combined the challenges of the disaggregated hailing to how technology can be built. And that for me is one example of one framework that I'm going to share with all of you on how to leverage the assets that are there in the market. Because Fast Track did not own any of the fleet, any of the cars. And I used to engage in a conversation with the drivers. They basically used to say, we have to pay about 4,000 rupees a month as an affiliation fee, and rest of it is yours. So there was no working capital problem for them because the money used to go to them. It is payment in cash, right? Not. And there was no problem of they asking cash or Ola credit. It was cash. So working capital was available. And most of them actually used to go to the petrol pump on the way to fill petrol and take advance of 100 or 200 rupees. Aprom kudukumbodhu kaichu kudukalam sir. So we used to be part of their working capital structuring. Anyhow, I was reminded, thanks to your talk. So what I'm going to share is SAMUNNATI's journey in a brief, and also share with you one of the frameworks that inspired a lot of thinking within SAMUNNATI. Because SAMUNNATI is one example of very many wonderful entities that are there in the market. But then as fellow entrepreneurs, you may want to look at, okay, what is in it for me? What is it that I can look at and explore and adapt to my business so that I can grow by 10x? It could be 100x. X is more important. The number of zeros prior to that depends on, as they say, the kaleja, the heart that you have. Right? And how audaciously one can think. Caveat, there is no preaching here. I'm just sharing my journey as an entrepreneur. And two, bigger caveat, growth brings pain. Right? It's not easy. You ask me the great journey that an entrepreneurship has given me, great. You ask me about the pain points that exist with the growth. There are as many. I wish I don't answer the calls. I wish I don't have people in front of my room. There are several wishes, but as entrepreneurs, we also are part of this journey. Right? So when SAMUNNATI as a concept germinated, because we are in agriculture, one of the things that I stumbled into is, where do you position this enterprise? Because we are in agriculture, you need to know the lay of the land, as they say, the kind of ecosystem that you operate in before even looking at what do you do. As an example, when you think of Rajasthan, can you think of growing paddy there? Right? You need to know. Notwithstanding the fact that Rajasthan indeed produces paddy. But you don't, because you know that water is scarce in that geography. As against, when you look at Kumbakonam, where you get water 20, 30 feet, you don't think of growing dates, right? It's for a desert country. So you need to know the lay of the land. And in my understanding, I stumbled into this framework that for enterprises which are aspiring to scale, There are three categories that exist, and it is important for us to understand where do we belong to, because the categories exist. The first one is a category where there are proven models, proven business structures, sustainable businesses making profits, Mr. Suresh, and demonstrating both the resilience of time as well as the efficiency of using technology for scale. That is one cohort, that is one category. And if your enterprise falls in that category, the only way for you to differentiate in that category is through efficiencies. I can do the same thing, better, faster, cheaper, and with a good customer experience. Just as an example, if you were to start a new bank now, what you offer as service remains the same. Liabilities, assets, internet banking, doorstep banking, branchless banking, not bankless banking, branchless banking, all of that. So your pitch is, hey, I can do all of this in a faster way, in a cheaper manner, more remunerative. But then the core remains the same. So that's one cohort or one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is greenfield, disruptive technologies, disruptive business models. And there are thousands of them cooking which we don't even know unless they come and disrupt. Some of the examples, again, Mr. Vembu has taken, the Swiggies, the Olas, the Ubers, right? And many of these models disrupted the way we behave. But then it is also a graveyard of many, many models which did not even see the light of the day. So when you belong to that end of the spectrum, how do you survive? How do you make sure that you have enough firepower, somebody else backing you, somebody else okay with not making money, and supporting you with more and more equity so that you are equity funded, equity run, equity survived. That's one end of the spectrum. There is a cohort in between. Everybody knows it is a huge sector. Everybody knows that there is something that needs to be done. Everything knows that the TAM is a large number, the total addressable market. Everybody knows that things that have been tried have not worked. And hence, we need a new thinking. And this is a space where we can learn from the past, but do things differently, not do what people in the past have done. And how do you leverage the non-linearity, the disruptive models of this end of the spectrum and not ignore the efficiency end of the spectrum. This is a cusp of the efficiency versus the green field, and agriculture falls in this third category is what I realized, because everybody knows the importance of this segment. $245 billion of addressable market. 60% of the population dependent on agriculture. Core to survival of human race. Priority sector lending, nationalization of banks, regional rural banks, microfinance industry, everything catering to this particular segment, but still unmet demand. Only 11% of the total addressable market has access to formal financial institutions. So this journey of Samunnati that you see starts from understanding that I belong to a sector which has tremendous potential, but there are far too many battle wounds, scars that are visible elsewhere in the sector that we need to learn from. I cannot have the same scars, but behind this jacket there are scars that are new to me, of course, because a segment that we venture into when you do new things has the learning dimension. So we as an entity belong to this segment with a vision to make markets work for smallholder farmers. That's the reason why we exist. And this is an important statement because markets, in our belief, people agree or may not agree, in our belief is where markets have been working off the smallholder farmers. How do we replace the off to for? Where instead of the focus on the mandis, the marketplaces, whether they are digital or physical, can we move the markets with farmer at the center? And this is where the markets working for smallholder farmers become relevant. And how are we going to do it? By removing the constraints, especially the working capital constraints between the players in the agri-value chain to make markets operate at a higher equilibrium. How do you increase the throughput? And this is where most of our engagement with the MSMEs comes into picture. We work with about 4,000 MSMEs in the agri-value chains in removing their working capital constraint, in removing their market linkages constraint, in making them operate at a higher equilibrium. So in this 6 years of scaled existence and 7.5 years of overall existence, we have had a reasonable scale, I would say. Scale from a dimension of the total addressable market is, as they say, a rounding of error. It is a rounding of error. But then scale from an entity that has come from scratch, I would believe we have covered a little distance. And this 10x, 100x that we are talking about and the framework that I'm going to share has had a significant contribution to our thinking, and hence I wanted to share these numbers. We work with about 3,800. The profile is a little dated. We work with about 3,800 farmer collectives, which in turn have a membership base of about 7 million smallholder farmers on the production side of the agri-value chain. And on the demand side, we work with about 3,000 to 4,000 agri-enterprises, which are aggregators, processing units, local adithyas, organized retail, all the way to ITC, Britannia, Ruchi Soya, Adani Wilmar, Patanjali, Arvind Mills, Inditex, so on and so forth. That's the range that we have in about 100 value chains in agriculture, with a presence in about 22 states with 50 offices and 700 people. Monthly run rate is about 300 to 400 crores that we do exclusively in agriculture, right? So that's the context of our scale. And our engagement is, as I mentioned, across the value chain. One of the beliefs that we have is that we don't disintermediate, because the moment you talk about value chain, supply chain dynamics, the first thing that people often look at is, hey, there are far too many intermediaries in between. The farmer gets 10 rupees, the consumer pays 100 rupees, right? This 10x is being taken away by the intermediaries in between. Remove or disintermediate 2 intermediaries there and 2 intermediaries here, and you get about 50 rupees on both sides. Give 25 to the farmer and keep 25 for you. Mathematically makes sense, no doubt about it. But practically, does it make sense? Which is what we realized when we started our journey, that it does not. Because the intermediaries, in addition to moving goods and cash, play many roles. They are the market makers. They are the cushion for price changes. They don't pass on the price fluctuation in between. And the best way to engage across the value chain is to engage with them as an internal player, not as an adversary, not as a competitor, but opt them in. So one of the fundamental learnings for us has been, if we are to grow 100x, we have to be an ecosystem player. We need to opt people in than looking at disintermediating. Work with the ecosystem, work with the players, work with the value chain actors. Be a collaborator. Collaboration is a virtue for entities that are looking at growing non-linearly, looking at growing exponentially. And you think of any of the entity that has grown, Swiggy, Uber, Ola, it's an ecosystem. They leverage assets. It's collaboratory engagement, right? And this has been the scale at which SAMUNNATI has grown. I have mentioned about it, from a humble beginning in Tiruvannamalai, in Tamil Nadu, to now where we are has been a bit of a accelerated journey. Now, what is it that we have brought in our engagement when we belong to the middle segment, where people have tried but have not succeeded, is this fundamental slide. We looked at leveraging 2 capitals that exist in many of the informal markets. The social capital, which is familiarity of a person in the geography, and the transaction history. So whenever there is a buy and a sell, the buyers and sellers are not transacting for the first time, more often than not in the rural markets, in the agri markets, right? whenever we go to buy anything, whether on the consumables or on the agri inputs or clothes for the festivals in the rural areas, we have definite places or the popular places that we often go. Similar is agri selling. Usually the buyers and sellers often work together, and in some cases it could be generations. How do we leverage this social capital, this familiarity of information to look at whom to lend? Because we started with lending approach and then got market linkages and then the advisory services and then the ecosystem play. Whom to lend is social capital. How much to lend is trade capital. But now who in the value chain controls this social capital, trade capital is the middle B, the aggregator. Some of you might be doing that. Right? They are the custodians of this social capital, trade capital. So how can you structure a lending product where you leverage the social capital and trade capital that is available within the players in the agri value chain and align the incentives so that the risk and reward are shared, wherein the aggregator also participates in the risk. Right? Because other than the producer, which is a farmer, all others are in the business of moving goods and cash. So this is a big departure that we brought in our lending, where we don't look at bank statements, we don't look at collaterals, we don't look at the tax returns in standalone in a way. We actually look at the social capital, trade capital, and triangulate that information with the available records, so that we'd be able to structure a proposition that would work for them rather than putting the cart before the bullock. So this is one fundamental approach that we brought in. Now this is where I would like to take a departure in terms of what has inspired our thinking. And a seminal work by a university called Singularity University, by a bunch of professors and industry experts, spearheaded by a gentleman by name Salim Ismail, have written a book on how organizations grow exponentially. And the book's name is Exponential Organizations. And this work has looked at entities that have transformed their scale and growth by leveraging technology, which is the topic for this seminar and topic that was given to me. And the next 3-4 slides, I would basically try to elaborate on some of the principles or the essence or the core idea behind entities that are growing exponentially. I'm sure, Rajesh, you may be looking at the customer delight from many of these technology dimensions as well. But then the core philosophy is, if the organizations are growing exponentially, you cannot grow on your own. You need to look at multiple things, both internal and external. But for that, you have to first to be inspired by what is driving you. And if you go back to genesis of Uber, the problem of not being able to get a taxi is what inspired Uber as a concept. So for every big innovation, there is a problem that inspired someone to take a look at how do I solve it. So what is it that inspires each one of us who are aspiring to grow big time? For me, in my 31 years of banking experience, I have spent 25 years in the rural and agri. How can I make markets work for smallholder farmers? Or how can we get the benefits of the markets to the farmer? How can we keep the farmer at the center? That is what inspires me. Similarly, you may have many things that you would have considered, but then one thing that inspires, and that one thing is what this work, EXO as it is called, talks about, which is the MTP, right? The transformational purpose that inspires. So are we clear about what is it that inspires us is the starting point for any organization looking at a nonlinear scale. Once we are clear about it is when we get into the frameworks. There are two pillars of this entire framework. One external, one internal. Right? The external one is on the right side, where you need creativity, where you need to handle uncertainty, where you need to have the ability to be agile that Mr. Vembu spoke about, right? What are those external dimensions? And this is an acronym called SCALE, right? SCALE. As I said, I have a technology challenge because I'm not able to read exactly what each of them is, but it is visible on the screen. Staff on demand, right? Community and sourcing, right? Algorithms, leveraged assets and engagement. On the left side, the more logical part of it is how is our internal organization structure designed to be able to leverage the external environment on the scale, to be able to scale. And here you have interfaces, then you have dashboards, our MIS and other reports that you would like to look at. Then you have experimentation at an internal level. How do you experiment at the fringes? And then you have autonomy to be able to make decisions, and as they say, entrepreneurial energy within the organization. And the last one being social, right? How do you create a dimension where people learn from each other within the organization? So let's double click. This is the last slide. Let us double click on each of these. And I will not go into detail of each and every aspect, but I will take the highlights of what this framework talks about, because this is not my work. This is a work that has inspired me, and I also have YouTube links to 2 of very good talks by Salim Ismail after this slide that you may want to take a look at, or the PPT can be shared. Actually, the organizers can share the PPT with the delegates here. Let me tackle the external one first. Organizations which aspire and which have grown significantly shun the idea of owning the force, owning the assets, owning the people. Because the employee-employer relationship is the most inefficient way of engaging. The best way to engage is partner to partner, peer to peer. Right? So whether it is a social enterprise or a commercial enterprise, how can you bring the dimension of staff being available on demand, which will help you to rev up and rev down your scale depending on where, what, and how your scale needs to be managed, needs to be amplified. Have more partners in geographies where you would like to expand. Shrink the number of partners that you would like to work with if you are to exit a market, but not put your own people, is what this calls about, staff on demand. And then pandemic has taught us how we can work remotely together. And pandemic, especially for technology companies, also has taught on how an employee can take up 3-4 jobs and be virtually present on all 4 screens. Staff on demand. Because the beauty of looking into the screen is you are indeed looking at the screen, but it's like, because it is Andhra's Chamber of Commerce, I can say, this is like Indu Kalladandu Ledani Sandeham Valadu. Right? Because for everywhere you see the same Anil Kumar on the screen, but you really don't know whether Anil Kumar is in Andhra Chamber of Commerce or Madras Chamber of Commerce, or which screen that he is visible on the other side. Right? Staff on demand. Right? Then comes into the community and crowdsourcing. How can you bring resources, crowdsourcing? And for me, Android is a fantastic example. Google is a fantastic example. Facebook is a fantastic example of how you can source ideas, resources, and the development, the talent, using community as the base, because you are constantly contributing to the betterment and development of that particular platform. In the context of SAMUNNATI, the work that we do with the farmer collectives is our staff on demand plus our community and crowd. We have seen some of the FPOs which had 300 to 400 members a year and a half ago, having 3,000 to 4,000 members. And the analogy that we internally talk about is, you don't tell the moths saying, hey moths, I'm going to light a lamp, please come. You'll basically say, hey, here is a lamp, the moths will come. How do you do that? By providing value addition. Value addition to the members. When you serve your existing members well, then the new members would come in. Who are these members? Farmers. What do they want? Input and output. Aggregating the input and aggregating the output. Simple. In agriculture. Maybe there are few things like that where you can look at how do you leverage the community / crowdsourcing for your engagement. All of us know the machine learning, AI, artificial intelligence, right? Then the blockchain, so on and so forth. For me, a person from agriculture, I understand AI from a different dimension. I was actually pleasantly surprised. There are two AIs in agriculture. Both are relevant. One is the artificial insemination that we have for the cattle in the animal husbandry space, and the artificial intelligence that we use using the drones, not necessarily drones these days, but the satellite imagery. And both these are fun as to how a farmer looks at it. Artificial insemination, important for the cow to be impregnated so that you have the calf, so that you have the milk, so that you can sell and then make some livelihood out of it. A satellite imagery saying, hey, I will tell you what is happening on your plot of land or 1 acre of land. The farmer would say, hey, I know what is happening. I don't need it now. So in terms of pricing structures, the first one is more preferred and they pay for it, and the paravets in the villages are actually taken care of. Whereas a technology that delivers value, but the farmer not being the right recipient of that, who is the customer who would pay? That is a fundamental dimension that algorithm should have to bring in if we are looking at non-linear scale, right? Leveraged assets. Nobody is now looking at owning anything. This is a generation, at least not my generation, but the younger generation actually is looking at not even owning the relationship. Right? Everything is convenience. Right? Okay, let's not go into that dimension. Let's just stay put with the physical attributes of running a business. People don't want to own car because in an app you can call a car. Then you can order furniture through Furlenco or other things. So you don't own, you hire furniture. You don't need to own a house because you never know, when you are going to be shifted, when you are going to shift your job, including the countries. So you want to have the agility in your movement, right? And you don't even own your employment because you know that I work for 6 months, then I take a break for 2-3 months and then come back and work. So there is no ownership on the employment also. So there are many assets that are available which need not be owned, that can be leveraged, is a core principle that exponentially growing organizations bring in, so that you can again on and switch on and switch off your capex and convert that into an opex. So some of the examples that SAMUNNATI is looking at is we don't need to own our branches. One of our representatives can actually sit in the FPO because customers don't walk into our offices. You don't need that, right? Do you need to own warehouses? No, not required. Each of the FPO can actually invest about 5 to 6 lakhs to set up a decent warehouse. Or they may have a warehouse which need to be refurbished. And we being lenders can bring in the dimension of resources to be able to refurbish it. So on and so forth. In your organization, in your own businesses, you may have many things where you don't need to own. Or gone are the days where you need to invest in capital assets. If you are to grow, or if your aspiration is to grow at 100x, look at ways in which you are capital light, as they say. And many of the investors love it when you say I'm capital light, because they know that you can achieve more with less. More with less. Right? So those are the external dimensions. Right? Now, how do you adapt your internal capability, your internal engagement, your internal structures to leverage these external opportunities, external dimensions, is what is this IDEAS. And it's again an acronym. First one is interfaces. How is the technology interface? Again, going back to the previous talk. Is your current system agile enough to get integrated to the APIs that are required for multitude of technologies that you may want to harness. Internally, we refer this, and I was sharing with Mr. Anand the other day when we met, that we are looking at constructing an ORR, outer ring road. Just visually imagine what is an outer ring road. An outer ring road is something that is silently being built in the periphery of the city, usually much farther, while there is an internal chaos inside the internal roads. One way of looking at it is expand the road, as they say, road expansion, by breaking the shops and houses and what have you. The other way is, hey, let us build an ORR, where you are not meddling with the existing chaos, but silently building something outside. And one principal advice that comes from this framework is, innovation is best done when it is done at the edges. Because there is something called immunity that every organization has. Every existing intervention has something called immunity, and that immunity kills new ideas by design. So innovation that is done at the edges often has a better survival chances, and that's why you see in pharma companies, the R&D. What happened? Okay. The R&D is always done by an external team, not the production team. The production team is different from the research team, research and development. So how do we engage the organization structure to fight immunity and build an ORR silently so that when it is ready, your new products, your new vehicles can play on that? And remember, every ORR has two limitations. One, no two-wheelers and no bullock carts allowed. In other words, from a business perspective, things that slow us down and things that are slow moving are not permitted on the ORR. So the ideas are basically the aspects that we have to look at from an organization perspective to facilitate this acceleration, this growth, right? And the first one is the interfaces. How is the current technology, how is the current operating structure engaged? We need to have a real-time dashboard. There, we all know about the lead indicators and lag indicators. Lag indicators are basically fait accompli. If somebody asks, what is your performance in July? As on 31st July, I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and come what may, I cannot change the outcome of it. But if I have to change the outcome of how my 30th September numbers are to be, the indicators that I have to see are what are called lead indicators. So the dashboards basically provide us the ability to track lag indicators from the fait accompli perspective in terms of what have we achieved vis-a-vis what we set out to achieve, and the lead indicators will tell us, are we in the right direction to achieve what we want to achieve. So the dashboards would help that. Nobody, I would say nobody in the entrepreneurial world would have not done experimentation, right? All of us would have done many experiments, right? As they say, there is no original thought, there is no original sin. All of us would have committed many, many mistakes. And somehow people keep referring to, fail fast structure. I wonder, why not succeed fast structure? You can still experiment and succeed fast, no? And failure is also a success. You at least know what not to do. But then do we have the culture to experiment? And from a leadership position, one of the things that we always tend to look at is things that have not succeeded as scars. They're battle scars. You have tried something to do. But from a leadership perspective, I learned in SAMUNNATI that one significant trait to keep the experimentation in is not to admonish or reprimand failures within the organization. Then the organization culture goes for a toss. Have there not been failures in the organization? Of course there have been. Are people responsible for that? Of course they are. But by chiding them, by reprimanding them, by admonishing them, we are basically killing the zeal to experiment, and organizations that are aspiring to grow 10x cannot afford to kill the experimentation or to kill the spirit of entrepreneurship within the organization. And for that to happen, you need to give them freedom, autonomy. Freedom to think, freedom to experiment, freedom to try it out, and most importantly, freedom to fail. It may sound a little cliche, but freedom to fail is an important freedom. Freedom cannot be had by telling, but by demonstrating that, hey, you have failed, that's okay, both of us learn, let us cry together for a little while and then get back to the work. The autonomy. And the last but not the least are social technologies, offering shoulders to each other, shoulder to walk together, shoulder to cry together, and shoulder to lift together. And social technologies provide a significant opportunity to do that, not internally, even externally. That's why, when there is a post, people start looking for how many likes, how many comments, right? And the success of your post is measured by number of likes. The other day, my son was just saying, I'm not a Facebook person, not an Insta person, not a Twitter person. I'm a Gmail person, right? That's where my technology ends. LinkedIn, yes, of course. I learn a lot by browsing LinkedIn. But then, the human in me is often, the moment I put a post, every half an hour I see how many views, how many comments. Comments also from a little bit of anxiety. Are people saying okay to what we are doing, or are there comments that perhaps we may need to delete? Who knows? The longer the comment that needs to be deleted stays, the more is the damage, no? So social technologies also come with the unintended consequence of opening up yourself to things that you may need to know but don't want to know. Right? How do you leverage the social technologies? Internally, even in the organization, a cultural event within the organization, the internal reward and recognition program, encouraging the children of the people whom we are working with, encouraging the customers that we are working with, can happen a lot through leveraging the social technologies. We conduct seminars in local languages, webinars, even easier. And we bring in the local customers to talk about their success stories, and they become instant celebrities. And we have just got someone who was a very senior person in TikTok. He was mentioning that the top 20 TikTok celebrities when TikTok was there, 18 of them were local celebrities actually. They were not the international celebrities. How do we provide the platform of social technology, whether it is YouTube or the Kacha Badam that we have, is a classic example of how social technology can make a hero out of a local person, right? So these two frameworks have inspired a lot of our internal and external thinking. And I thought for organizations that are aspiring to grow exponentially, this could be a good framework for you to reflect on, for you to dwell on. As they say, these are all the tools that we have. How do we harness the tools that we have, and how do we use them to what we need to achieve is in our hands, right? And these two links, one is a 47-minute video, the second one is a 18-minute video, would throw a significant light on understanding these two frameworks together with the examples, right? So I'm not going to play another 46 and another 18 minutes. I know lunch is around the corner, cognizant of the time, but I pause here and thank the organizers, Anand, Madam, for the opportunity to share our journey as well as share this framework that has inspired our journey with an aspiration that perhaps there are X number of entities that would indeed grow 100X. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, sir. We will have only one question if you would like to ask the speaker. Any questions?
No, lunch is definitely around the corner. And I am going to be here, right?
Anyway, thank you, sir. To present the mementos to the speaker, I now invite Mr. R.R. Padmanabhan, Chairman, Foreign Trades and Skill Development, Subcommittee of the Chamber.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar and Mr. Anil, for your insightful session. We have another short talk by Yes Bank, and then we'll wind up for lunch. Before that, I thought I'll share a quick update to you. There is a media here called Dots Media, who's our YouTube partner. So they wanted to actually interact with you. I mean, they are quite active in promoting MSMEs through their YouTube channel, more than 2 lakh subscribers. So any of your participants here, if you wanted to talk about your product, your business with Dot Media, they are readily available for interview. After the lunch is over, maybe you can take 5-10 minutes, interact with them. And even evening after the session is over, you can always interact with Dot Media for promoting your products and services through their YouTube channel. Now over to Madam.
Thank you, sir. Now we move on to the next session. When it comes to finance for MSMEs, banks will be the first priority. We have with us today Mr. Ramu Bandara, Regional Business Leader, MSME, Executive Vice President of Tamil Nadu and Kerala S Bank,